Born to be Riled, written and read by Jeremy Clarkson. Norfolk, twinned with Norfolk. In a previous life, I spent a couple of years selling Paddington Bears to toy and gift shops all over Britain. Commercial travelling was a career that didn't really suit, because I had to wear one. But I've ended up with an intimate knowledge of Britain's highways and byways. I know how to get from Cropredy to Burg Wallis, and from London Apprentice to Marchington Woodlands. I know where you can park in Basingstoke, and that you can't in Oxford. However, I have absolutely no recollection of Norfolk. I must have been there because I can picture, absolutely, the shops I used to call on in one town or another in this flat and featureless county. And there's another thing. I can't remember the name of one town. The other day I had to go to a wedding in one little town in Norfolk. It's not near anywhere you've heard of. There are no motorways that go anywhere near it, and God help you if you run out of petrol. For 30 miles the Cosworth ran on fumes until I encountered what would have passed for a garage 40 years ago. The man referred to unleaded petrol as that newfangled stuff, and then when I presented him with a credit card, he looked like I'd given him a piece of myrrh. Nevertheless, he tottered off into his shed and put it in the till, thus proving that no part of the 20th century has caught up with Norfolk yet. That's not surprising, because it's nearly impossible to get there. From London, you have to go through places such as Hornsey and Tottenham before you find the M11, which sets off in the right direction, but then, perhaps sensibly, veers off to Cambridge. And from everywhere else, you need a Camel Trophy Land Rover. Then, when you get there and you're sitting around in the hotel lobby waiting for the local man to stop being a window cleaner, a gynaecologist and a town crier, and be a receptionist for a while, you pick up a copy of Norfolk Life. It's the world's smallest magazine. In the bar that night, when we said we had been to a wedding in Thorndon, everyone stopped talking. A dart hit the ceiling and the man behind the counter dropped a glass. No one, he said, has been to Thorndon since it burned down 40 years back. Then he went off, muttering about the widow woman. Moving about Norfolk, however, can be fun. I'm used to having people point as I go by. Most shout, "Hey, look, it's a Cosworth." But in Norfolk they shout, "Hey, look, it's a car." Everywhere else people want to know how fast it goes, but in Norfolk they asked how good it was at ploughing. The spoiler fascinated them because they reckoned it might be some sort of crop sprayer. I'm sure witchcraft has something to do with it. The government should stop promoting the Broads as a tourist attraction, and they should advise visitors that here be witches. They spend millions telling us it's foolish to smoke, but not a penny telling us not to go to Norfolk, unless you like orgies and the ritual slaying of farmyard animals. The next time some friends get married in Norfolk, I'll send a telegram, except it won't get there because they haven't heard of the telephone yet, or paper, or ink. All aboard the Real Calf Express. It's a fact that most people in the major financial institutions go to work by train, which means they harbour a deep-seated hatred of British Rail. You can see them all piling out of the station at 11 a.m, 6 hours after they left home in Kent, clutching their customer charter forms and muttering to one another about how it was leaves the last time and the wrong-shaped snow before that. This is a big problem for British Rail as it heads towards privatisation. Without the support of the city boys, and they're hardly likely to get it having wrecked their lives for so long, the flotation will be a disaster. So they've come up with a cunning plan which involves demonstrating to their customers that the alternative to rail travel is even worse. Ever since I was thrown off a train by the police for arguing with a guard who should have been drowned at birth, I've made it my business to avoid their pitifully inadequate, overpriced, badly run, slow, sick-making service. But last weekend I had to go to Harwich. And for all sorts of complicated reasons I couldn't drive, so with bad grace I set off for Liverpool Street Station, where the man at the ticket desk said, without looking up, that Aborigines have their fish in the laundry. Seriously, this guy had not mastered the art of speech, and if he'd been on one of those customer care programmes that BR is always harping on about, I can only deduce that the lecturer was on holiday that week, or Goebbels. I explained that I couldn't understand a word he was on about and that it might be better if he looked up so I could see his lips. This helped a lot, and I was able to work out that the train to Harwich had been cancelled. No sorry, no nothing. His head just flopped down again like his neck had suddenly broken. Which it would have done had there not been a piece of glass separating us. Why do they have that glass anyway? Who wants to rob those dunderheads? Instead of a train, there was to be a coach, and this sent shivers down my spine. A coach! I'd rather have gone to the dentist. I don't go on coaches. Coaches are for old people to go on tours of North Wales. Coaches are for students who want to go from Northampton to Sheffield for 10p. Coaches don't have seatbelts, and they roll down embankments, killing everyone on board. To make sure we boarded it, there were some small Chinese women marshalling the crowd, shouting at shufflers. It was like a scene from Schindler's List, except where was the bus's exhaust outlet? Now, British Airways has proved that it's possible to fit a human being into a space 30% smaller than his body, but the coach operators have gone much further. What you do on a coach is get yourself roughly near the seat, and then a Chinese woman comes along with a mallet and hammers you into position. Then some Scandinavians pile rucksacks on your head. I began to wonder why on earth anyone needs a seatbelt on a coach. The driver could have driven into a wall at 100 miles an hour, and I wouldn't have felt a thing. There is no smoking on board, but that's okay, because not even Harry Houdini could have got into my pockets. And anyway, the packet had taken a direct hit from the mallet, so all the Marlboros were bent and broken. Now, I've just come back from Cuba, and I remember staring in open-mouthed wonderment as the buses there, huge 300-seaters, trundled by with 500 dismal faces pressed to the glass. What I hadn't realised is that I was staring in the face of sheer luxury. Bus travel in Britain is far worse, and the pain is doubly bad here because we know what we're missing. We know that it isn't beyond the wit of man to fix up a buffet bar or a lavatory, or indeed to space the seats in such a way that I could breathe properly. They didn't even have women coming down the aisles offering to empty a pot of coffee into your lap in exchange for £1.20. I swear as we went past one field in Essex, a herd of veals was pointing at us and waving placards. On a coach, you pay your money, and crashes permitting, it takes you there. That's it. This is frill-free travel, and at the other end of your journey, more people come with spatulas to ease you out of your seat. It was, without doubt, the worst 2 hours of my entire life, and when we emerged at Harwich Docks, I found myself staring wistfully at the trains there. They looked so big and so fast, and all the staff looked like angels, a bit fatter perhaps, but with their sandwiches and their teas they were definitely God's children. And they are working for a bunch of people who are very obviously brilliant. To have thought up the idea of putting disgruntled rail customers on a coach once in a while to shut them up is inspired. And anyone who can think like that gets my vote. When the flotation comes, I'll take 400 shares, please. Drink-driving do-gooders are over the limit. How very heartening it is to see the government is to step up its fight against the bubonic plague. Even though they admit that it was wiped out by the Great Fire in 1666, they still feel that more funds and more hospitals are needed to combat this dreadful disease. It's also good to note that at last they're to prevent the Royal Navy from using press gangs to recruit new sailors. They have offices in most towns' high streets, and I don't know why they won't use them, said a spokesman last week. Other recent announcements from Whitehall couldn't have come a moment too soon. Kings will no longer be allowed to behead anyone they don't like very much, Wessex is to get its own legislature, and the campaign against drink driving is to be moved up a gear. What? There is now lamb chop all over my television because there I was, eating supper, when the Roads Minister, Robert Key, who looks like he's seen rather too many lamb chops in his time, came on the news to talk about his war on people who drink and drive. All 7 of them. In 1982, 43,341 people were breathalyzed, and 31.1% of them were over the limit. Something needed to be done, and something was. In 1992, 108,856 people were breathalyzed, and under 8% were found to be positive. In other words, the government has won its battle. But Mr. Key says 610 people died in drink-related accidents last year, and that his fight goes on. Well, my dear chap, most of those were probably wobbly pedestrians who fell in front of sober drivers, and short of adopting a Muslim attitude to drink, you aren't going to do very much about that sort of thing, are you? Apparently, yes. In America, dinner party hosts are being sued by their friends for failing to provide soft drinks, and while that's unlikely to catch on here, Mr. Key does ask that we encourage sobriety when we have people round. Now look, I spend most of my time these days sitting around dinner tables not being allowed to smoke or eat meat, and now Key says I can't have a glass of wine either. I bet he never bans food. His next point is that young people often find it difficult to say no to a drink because of social pressure. Well, the last time someone was this wrong, he was called Neville Chamberlain, and he had a piece of paper in his hand. It is in fact old people who are by far and away the worst offenders, and the reason they get away with it is because at night the police tend to stop youngsters in hot hatchbacks rather than rosy-cheeked farmers in Jags. Key has proved that he is not in the real world, and that he should be fed to the lions. But he has yet more. It seems he wants to lower the legal limit, arguing that 1 pint affects a person's ability to drive. Sure does, fatty, but so does being old. A 17-year-old with 1 pint in his triangular torso has faster reactions than a sober pensioner. So why not ban old people from driving? Or people with a cold? Or those who need to go to the loo? Because I sure as hell can't concentrate when I'm bursting for a pee and you haven't provided any service stations. And anyway, what do you lower the legal limit to? 0? And when does someone have no alcohol in his blood? 5 hours after a pint? 5 days? No one would ever dare drive again. We've had a long line of idiots in the transport ministry, but this one tops the lot, and weighs the most as well. Ferrari's Desert Storm. We don't have roads like this in Britain. Coming off the roundabout, it plunges arrow straight into the heart of the Arabian desert for mile after unrelenting mile. It doesn't really go anywhere special, and so there's not much traffic, but even so, the oil-rich local authority has made it super smooth and with 2 lanes in each direction. Nature has helped out with the safety because on either side there is soft sand which will firmly and sternly bring any errant car to a halt. That's the hardware, but the software is even more impressive. Up front there's a Ferrari F40 which the owner has modified so its turbocharged engine now gives out a colossal 600 brake horsepower. As it rockets away from the roundabout, each gear change is signalled by a huge sheet of flame from the exhaust system. The Ferrari F40 is desperately fast in standard tune, but this one, in the half-light of evening, is something really very special indeed. Fast is too small a word. Be-bloody-be-frigging-leavable is nearer the mark. However, it is in my way. As its driver shifts from 3rd to 4th, I can see him glancing in his rearview mirror at the monster that will not be shaken off. As he hits 5th, I'm still there, a little closer now, and flashing my lights to warn him I'm coming through. This was my first ever drive in a Jaguar XJ220, and I simply couldn't believe the size of its power. I knew this was a car built to be the fastest in the world, a record it held for a short time, but it had never really excited me before. It was just so damn big, and while I respected Jaguar for making it look odd and unusual, I always thought the overhangs looked wrong, like the wind had eroded some vital part of the car away. Plus, its miserable little 6-cylinder engine, reputed to be the same unit that had been used in the Metro rally car, just didn't send out the right aural signals. I still think all those things, but there's no getting away from the fact that it is unbelievably fast. I mean, it just loped past the F40 and kept on going to 195 miles an hour, the fastest I've ever driven. My previous record, 186 miles an hour, was achieved in a Lamborghini Countach, and I vowed I'd never go that quickly again. It was terrifying as the car bucked and writhed and shook and rattled. It was patently obvious that while the engine was capable of such things, the dear old car was not. But in the Jaguar, all was serene. Sure, the wind noise had built up to a double hurricane, but all the seals stayed intact. The steering stayed calm, and the suspension never felt like a pebble would put me in the desert, upside down and on fire. In fact, truth be told, the reason I slowed down was boredom, and also because I wanted to have a go in the other cars, the aforementioned F40, a Porsche 959, and the new Ferrari F50. They all belong to the same guy, who uses them infrequently and insures them even less. The Jag wasn't even registered, while the 959 service history suggested, wrongly, it was still the property of the Sultan of Oman. Whatever, it was a mouth-watering selection of machinery to find in a lay-by, especially when I could choose what to drive next. I drove all of them in turn and found myself marvelling at how national characteristics shine through even in the quest for speed. The Italian duo were lively and vocally active. If they'd had arms, they would have waved them about as they pootled along. The Brit was a heavyweight, leather-lined and rather calm. In town it was as unruffled as an embassy dinner. This was a car that would know its fish fork from its dessert wine. And then there was the German, the 959, which tried to achieve world domination by a dazzling array of computerized goodies. Ordinarily, I have no trouble figuring out even the most bizarre dashboards, but in the 959 there are dials and knobs that are simply meaningless. One light was winking away, warning me that the pressure in the rear offside tyre was a little low. It was all very impressive, but so is a dentist's drill. And therein lies the problem. I actually had the time and the inclination to think about these things as I roared around in the desert in 4 of the most exciting cars the world has ever seen. The trouble is that there were no passers-by to enjoy the looks and the sense of occasion. If there had been, then it would have been a built-up area, and I'd have been doing 30. And that's the other hassle. Speed in itself is not exciting. As you sit in a Boeing, are you thrilled that it's ripping up the sky with a 500-mile-an-hour orgy of big numbers? No. And it's the same deal in a straight line on a straight road in a car. 200 miles an hour? So what? What matters is acceleration and handling, and ability to take corners as though they're not there. And this is why the Ferrari F50 has been so well received by those who know. It's light and simple, like a choux pastry in a world full of suet pudding. Small boys may argue that its top speed of 206 miles an hour means it's slower and therefore less good somehow than the 237 mile an hour McLaren F1. But that's nonsense. The Ferrari is built to take corners, and it only uses that ex-Formula 1 V12 engine for dealing with the rather tedious straight bits. It seems that once again, Ferrari's got it right. Speeding toward a pact with the devil. In recent months there have been several distressing moments on TV. We were all moved by the scenes of poverty and deprivation from Rwanda, and my mother was shocked by the language and violence in Goodfellas. But according to an obscure government quango, the most irresponsible and dangerous programme on TV is Top Gear. The quango in question is called PACTS, Parliamentary Advisory Council for something or other. And it says that when Top Gear refers to a car's ability to knock on the door of 150 miles an hour, we're guilty of glamourising speed. Funny that. I never knew glamourising had a U in it. PACTS also says that speeding costs 1,200 lives a year. Well, they've obviously researched this subject with the same diligence that they spell their letters, because if speed really does kill, Concorde would be the most dangerous means of travel. And I've just done a quick calculation and reckon the number of people killed by Concorde so far is 0. And that makes it pretty damn safe in my book. When will people learn that speed cannot kill someone? It needs to be mixed with something else first. Like the sort of bad driving you see in Whitehall at 5:30 when all the quangos are shutting down for the night. Besides, if speed is so lethal, how come motorways, which carry 15% of all the traffic in this country, account for only 3% of the casualty accidents? And if you do crash on a motorway, you are 3 times less likely to die than if you crash in a built-up area. PACTS is undeterred by the facts, though, and backs up its claims by saying that about 1/3 of all fatally injured vehicle occupants are involved in a speed-related accident. What speed? 90 miles an hour? 40 miles an hour? .002 miles an hour? It doesn't say. If the people who make up packs are typical, I know exactly what we're dealing with here. Wizened old has-beens in Hondas who suffer from the upper-class disease of too much money and not much brain. Unable to get a proper job, but duty-bound to do something constructive, they sit on endless committees, doing good things. And just because the patron is a marquis or a baroness or a marquis, everyone they write to is supposed to fall on their sword and promise never to stray again. When I test a car, I don't leave out the price just because some viewers can't afford it, and I won't leave out the top speed either. It's a salient point. And if I described it in a drab monotone, everyone would throw chairs at the TV. If there's one character trait I despise even more than reasonableness and socialism, it's idealism. Yes, it would be lovely if no one was killed on the roads and there was no war, but there are and there is, and that's tough titties. It's like the NHS. It would be ideal if I had a nurse, a GP and a selection of specialists in attendance 24 hours a day, but this cannot happen. We have to be realistic, but you can bet that someone somewhere is prancing about on a bloody quango telling anyone who'll listen that Stow-on-the-Wold needs 9 new hospitals. Yes, it does. But it can't have them, and that's an end to it. Do you know that there are a bunch of women outside Greenham Common even today? Though the base is now used only for Top Gear photo shoots and police driver training, they say they won't move until the last nuclear weapon has been removed from the face of the earth. But if the entire American Pacific Fleet can't persuade North Korea to stop making its atom bombs, I really don't think a bunch of hippies in Berkshire has much of a chance. There's bound to be a quango up in Whitehall where people with gout meet once a week to decide how best to deal with these grubby New Age campers. And the odd thing is that both groups of people are as daft as each other. A laugh a minute with Schumacher in the Mustang. Michael Schumacher is a German, which means that he should by rights be fat, loud, vulgar, and in possession of some ridiculous clothes to go with his absurd facial hair. Yet his torso is the shape of Dairy cheese, and his face is unburdened with any form of topiary. At post-race press conferences he is intelligent, modest when he wins, and quick to congratulate when he doesn't. So, when I met him at Silverstone this month, I was rather disappointed to note that he was surly, impatient, and about as communicative as that Red Indian chappie in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I have had more inspiring conversations with my pot plants, and they're dead. I told him my wife hoped he would win the World Championship, and he gave me a look which made me think that I'd inadvertently said, "You are the most disgusting human being that I've ever had the misfortune to encounter." Later I tried again, asking him what he thought of the Mustang, which, judging by his reaction, translates into German as, "I know that you like little boys, and I'm going to tell your team manager unless you give me some money." Had he driven a Mustang before, I asked, fully expecting another withering glance from the driver's seat. "Yes," came the reply. "Where?" I asked, not realizing that where in German means, "I hope you fall into a combine harvester, you maggot-faced creep." So I gave up with the conversation and settled back to watch the fastest man in Formula One deal with the slowest sports car in the world. On lap 1 there were other cars on the track, so we pottered around. Then on lap 2, instead of giving me the ride of my life, Mr. Schumacher chose to demonstrate the driving positions. On lap 3 we were following Top Gear's camera car, so I asked if we could see some wild and leery tail slides. We did, but sadly each one ended up with a spin. I couldn't help wondering if these gyrations might have been avoided if Mr. Schumacher had kept both hands on the wheel. But who am I to question the ability of the greatest driver Germany has ever produced? And apart from muttering about how the Mustang had plenty of grip and wasn't bad for an American car, he told me nothing about what it was like to drive. So I set off on my own and fell head over heels in love. The new Mustang's body is not particularly pretty or brutal, but it is big and eye-catching. Everyone turns to look, and everyone knew what it was, even though this was the first in Britain. To drive, it's American and rather good in a cheesy grin, firm handshake, hi, how are you doing sort of way. It's a big, open, honest sort of car, which, despite the air conditioning, cruise control, power seats, power windows, power roof and 5-litre V8, costs just $22,000 in the USA. It's not very fast. Ask it to go beyond 130 and it gives you a look of pure incredulity. And it treats corners with the same disdain I reserve for vegetarians. It will do everything in its power to go straight on, but there's never a moment when you think it might go round a bend, so there are no surprises. You know where you are with this car. It also makes a good noise, unless you take it past 3,500 RPM when it sounds strangled. But hey, have you ever heard Stallone hit a high C? No, the Mustang is muscle-bound, dim-witted and slow, but it's a good guy to have around town at night, looking mean and threatening. It's the automotive equivalent of Carlsberg's Special, which is probably the reason why Mr. Schumacher was so underwhelmed. He, after all, is sponsored by Mild 7, which are the most limp and pathetic cigarettes I've ever encountered. They have about as much to do with hairy-assed Mustangs as fish. Cable TVs and JCBs. Roads wear out, and every so often we must expect the cavaliers in the outside lane to be replaced by men whose trousers fail to cover all their bottoms. Cones will go up and the traffic will stop. It may well be irritating to sit there being gently marinated in your own sweat, but the fact is that roadworks are the inevitable result of a thriving society in which 42-ton trucks thunder up and down the highways and byways, bringing fresh produce to your corner shop. However, there's a worrying trend. For the last 4 weeks, London's South Circular Road has been closed due to an entirely new sort of roadwork. I have been marooned by gridlock traffic for more than a month, and it's not because the road had worn out or because some vital underground maintenance needed to be carried out. No, they have dug up the main artery between southwest England and the city because Videotron, our local cable TV company, decided to drive one of their JCBs through a water main. You'll know when the cable people are about to come round because you'll wake up one morning to find the pavement outside your house looks like one of Joseph's more vivid overcoats. All the electricity, gas and water routes are individually marked out in different coloured chalk, so they know exactly where to dig when the time comes. When the time does come, your street begins to look like the Somme. If they don't park a JCB on your car, they'll encase it with mud, and then, when all their carefully laid chalk marks are covered with more mud, they'll wait for you to step into the shower before they drill through the water pipe. You get out and are halfway through writing a book on your computer, and they'll cut the power. Then, in the evening, when you have 8 people coming for dinner, they'll sever the gas. Outside, there will be troughs both at the top and the bottom of your road, so even if you could get to your car, there's no way you'll be able to drive it anywhere. A day or two after they finish, a man with a bad suit and a cheesy grin will knock on your door, asking if you'd like the cable service, which, in case you hadn't noticed, is now available in your street. If this happens, there's only one course of action. You must punch him straight in the mouth. What you must not do is invite him in and sign all the various forms which spew out of his plastic briefcase. If you do, more men will come round to drill great big holes in your walls, just so that your television can show exactly what was coming in anyway, via the big council house wok on the roof. I now have cable TV, and it is a disaster. It tells me what's happening in Lewisham, and at night it shows me a bunch of overweight German blondes with black pubic hair having simulated sex. There are 2 24-hour-a-day news services, both presented by people whose teeth are so white I can't look at them, and reruns of programmes which weren't funny 25 years ago, and which are very not funny now. I can see French game shows, and if I tune into QVC, I can buy a video recorder from Tony Blackburn. Yesterday, a woman spent 1 hour trying to sell me a necklace, so I tuned to MTV, where Prince was singing a song called My Name is Prince. Blimey. Most of the 36 channels on offer are scrambled, and if I want better porn or big bucks films or perish the thought football, I need to dig even deeper into my pockets. And I refuse to let my money be used to dig up your street. It's not sociable. To be fair, I do get a great deal of motorsport on my TV these days, but car racing without the Murray Walker soundtrack is like holidaying in a caravan. It's not really a holiday at all. The only advantage Eurosport has is that it covers post-race press conferences, whereas Grandstand switches immediately to cricket as the checkered flag falls. But is this worth £168 a year when you get the BBC for half that? Plus, the BBC doesn't dig up your roads, sever all your essential services, cut off your telephone for 2 days, or send cheesy salesmen round wearing awful clothes. Sermon on Sunday drivers. There's a bar in Austin, Texas, where the locals gather on a Thursday to dance the night away, country style. Strangely, even though some of the chaps are the size of a double garage and their womenfolk are even larger, it's a graceful sight to behold. And so, during the week, are Britain's motorways. Stand on a service station footbridge and you're treated to what can only be described as automotive ballet. Get yourself onto the M40 on a Tuesday and you will see a display of driving that would leave Damon Hill breathless. Sure, he can control a car at 180 miles an hour, but unlike the reps in their Mondeos and Vectras, he doesn't have a phone in one hand and a pork farm sausage roll in the other. Formula One chiefs are concerned about the speed differential between the top cars and the 40s, but guys, Mondeo man is out there every day on the motorway, doing 90, juggling with juggernauts that can barely crack 50, and he doesn't whinge. He can't because he has no grounds. British truckers are in a class of their own. Think, when was the last time one of these seven-axle giants caused you even so much as a moment of concern on the motorway network? It never happens. They get on with their lives, getting lettuces to the shops before brownness sets in, and you get on with yours. Of course, you're good too. I drove up from London to Oxford last Tuesday. Now, I've never seen such fine driving. These guys were harassed and bored, but they made deft, precise and well-signalled moves. They kept up when it was right, hung back when it was necessary, and as a result, never gave any cause for concern. Like anything, practice makes perfect. The more you drive, the better you'll get. If you're out there every day, be it in a truck or a Mondeo, clocking up 50,000 or more miles in a year, you'll be damn good. You'll learn to recognise the danger signals. That's a Datsun. He's likely to do the unexpected. That's a T5 doing 50. It must be plod. It's starting to rain. I'm easing off now. I use Britain's motorway network a great deal during the week, and it's like being part of a huge, perfectly synchronised, well-oiled dance routine. Everything is fluid. Everything is inch perfect. Unfortunately, I also use Britain's motorway network on a Sunday, and it is an experience that takes me to the outer edges of fear and trepidation. 2 miles and my collie is well and truly wobbled. Last week I found a Vauxhall Nova with a lone woman on board trundling down the outside lane of a dual carriageway at, get this, 15 miles an hour. What in God's name was she doing in possession of a driving licence? Enid Nunn 004, licence to kill and be killed. Now, I don't believe there are many people left who, just for the hell of it, go out for a drive on a Sunday, and even if there are, I doubt they'd chance their arm on a motorway. But there are undoubtedly a great many people who, after they've done the mail on Sunday, head off to see Auntie Flo via the garden centre. These people probably never drive during the week, and in a whole year probably clock up fewer than 2,000 miles. They've never been trained to drive on a motorway, and they have no practice. Allowing them out there is like letting me take the role of principal violinist the next time the LSO's in town. I'd be crap, and they'd sack me. These people get into lane they'll want 20 miles early and will do everything in their mealy-mouthed little minds to ensure you and I do likewise. If they can get their wheezing, asthmatic old crocs up to 70, they'll sit in the outside lane making sure no one gets past. It's against the law, you know. They clutter up the petrol stations with their awful cardigans, putting unleaded in their diesels and Wendy's panties in their hideous, hateful children. And then they crawl down the slip road at 4 miles an hour, joining the motorway when they're up to 6. Suddenly, the professional, talented, regular driver finds his space is full of no-hopers. The trucks may not be out to play on a Sunday, but you still have an odd and dangerous cocktail. On a Tuesday, 99% of all the cars out there will do exactly what you expect them to do. but on a Sunday, half will do exactly the reverse. I have discussed various solutions with all sorts of clever people, but there don't seem to be any that are practical. You can't include motorways in the driving test because the good people of Norfolk and Cornwall would be stuck. You can't post lookouts at the top of every slip road to pull over people they suspect may be a nuisance when they get down there. And we can't encourage people in bad cardigans to drive around with a huge sign in their rear windows saying, "I'm really no good at this." Or can we? Caravans, a few liberal thoughts. After much thought in the bath this morning, I've decided that we really don't need an elected parliament. These 650 guys are concerned not with what's good for the country or the environment, but with power. Every decision they make is based on a quest for votes. I remain absolutely convinced that the Labour Party's apparent shift to the right has nothing whatsoever to do with the elected members' beliefs. They're just saying what they think the middle classes want them to say. And the Conservatives are no better. Here are a bunch of people who'd done all that was necessary by 1989. They could have just sat back and let things tick over, but no. Half of them now want to privatise my shoes. We should replace them all with a bloke who has a bit of common sense. Every Thursday he'd pop down to Westminster so that civil servants could ask for advice. Should the Spanish be allowed to fish in our waters? No. Should Peter Blake be allowed to keep his 90 grand? No. Should we ban scoutmasters from keeping guns? Yes. Should we shoot people who let their dogs crap in the street? Yes. It's all so simple. We don't need 650 people making noises like farmyard animals 5 days a week when most of the burning issues could be settled over a cup of coffee by a bloke in a cardigan. Certainly, if we were to introduce this new system, and I really think it's one of my better ideas, the roads would become free from caravans. Should this question ever be brought before the Commons, the member for Devon North would argue forcefully that caravans form part of his constituency's lifeblood, and that if they were to be banned so soon after the cows were burned, there'd be anarchy and looting on the streets of Minehead. And then someone else would rise to their feet and point out that some of his voters work in a caravan factory and that they'd be out of work, claiming benefit, and that would be it. Caravans would stay. Whereas under my system, the bloke in a cardie would weigh up the issues over a slurp of Kenko and say, no, they must go. In 12 years of writing about motoring, I've only touched on this issue once, because it didn't seem important. I lived in London, and on the rare days when I sallied forth to the provinces, I was on a motorway. But now I live in the Cotswolds, and it's unbelievable. I've just taken delivery of a new supercharged Jaguar, and so far I haven't had it past 20 because round every corner the road is blocked by a Sprite Alpine. I was stuck behind one called Sprint the other day. How can you call a caravan a Sprint? And when they're parked in a field, they hardly blend into the environment. As Mark Wallington says in his magnificent book 500 Mile Walkies, why can't they be painted black and white and given udders? As a child, I went on a few caravan holidays, and I remember wondering what on earth we were doing there. I mean, we lived in a large farmhouse in the countryside, and now, here we were, decamped in a small box in the countryside, feet away from a fat family whose daughter, Janet, had woeful diarrhea. This, however, is not the issue. If people want to spend their precious vacation in a metal container in a field full of other metal containers, eating shabby food and defecating in a bucket, fine. The problem with caravans is that you can't simply beam them to a site Star Trek style. You must hook them up to the back of your wheezing asthmatic car and with absolutely no training whatsoever, tow the damn thing into some of Britain's greener parts. Like here. People. As you look in your rearview mirror and see a trail of cars stretching back to the horizon, do you not feel even the smallest pang of guilt? Do you not feel that it might be a good idea and pull over and let everyone by once in a while? Do you not vow that next year you will undertake the journey at night when you would be less of a bother? Or do you secretly relish having the power of being part of a tiny, tiny minority who, for a few hours every year, can control something huge like traffic speed? Did you dream as a child of being a councillor or joining the parks police? Go on, admit it. You did. You are a mealy-mouthed little twerp with no regard for others. In the last few weeks you've made me late for every single appointment, and you don't give a damn. If caravans can't be outlawed, and without my new system of government they never will be, there should at least be some new rules. Anyone wishing to tow one should be forced to take a complicated driving test. They cannot be towed by any car with less than 300 pounds-feet of torque. They can only be taken on roads between 2 and 6 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, and they should incur a road tax of £200 a foot. Blind leading the blind. This is what it said on the first page of my joining pack for the world's weirdest motorsport event. Rallying has never featured very significantly in the lives of blind people. No, and neither will it. Men can't have babies. Fish can't design submarines. BBC producers can't make up their minds. And blind people don't make very good rally drivers. However, they can navigate. More than that, in the last 6 years there have been 25 rallies in India where the co-drivers have had more in common with a bat than Tony Mason. Now, to be perfectly honest, I'm not talking about the sort of rally where the car's wheels only ever touch the ground in service halts. No, this sort is best described as a treasure hunt. Even so, disappointingly, there are rules, the worst of which is that all cars must be fitted with seat belts. This meant that when I took part there were only 66 competitors, which isn't good enough in a country with 9 million blind people. But hey, I'm used to rules, and the best way round them is to indulge in a bit of boss hoggery. I figured that if I nicked the notes from the navigator, he'd never know and we'd win. But the organisers had that one covered. All the directions were in Braille, a language which means as much to me as Swahili or German. Like everyone else, we had to use the force, but unlike everyone else, we went wrong at the very first turn. Let me explain. The Braille was in English, and this was not a language that featured on my co-driver's CV. So he spelt out each instruction letter by agonisingly slow letter. Thus we left the base and headed off toward the centre of Madras in our Maruti Gypsy, with Mr. Padmana Bahan muttering TYRDINAKLMEYRLEFF, which if you have a pen and a piece of paper and a fortnight you could work out meant turn left in a kilometre. Trouble was, it took me nearly 5 miles to figure it out, by which time we were completely and hopelessly lost. Not only do I not speak Braille, but my Tamil's not that good either. And there I was, with a blind man, in a city that I've never been to before, and never want to go to again, incidentally, on the same landmass, worryingly, as Portugal and Yemen. Things could go wrong here. We'd be drifting down a road, and all of a sudden Mr. Padmanabhan would look up from his notes to ask, "What is LKJRIJLSSSAQJT?" And to be honest, there really isn't much of an answer. But somehow, and I guess quite by chance, we did happen upon a checkpoint. Relieved, I wound down the window and asked just how far behind we were. But here's a funny thing. They said we were the first to come through, which was strange as we'd been the last to leave. However, it all became crystal clear when they told us that we were at checkpoint 6, and that we'd somehow missed 1 to 5. I knew damn well how we'd missed them. We'd been in Tibet. Nevertheless, we ploughed on until suddenly I was told to stop. "We are now at checkpoint 7, he said. But we weren't. We were in the middle of an industrial estate, and it's hard to point out to a blind man that he's gone wrong. "Again, I'm sorry," I said, "but we're not." "Yes, we are," he insisted, and to avoid hurting his feelings I had to leap out of the car to get my card stamped by a non-existent official at a checkpoint which wasn't there. "Told you so," he said, when I got back in the car. Back at base, the event over, we learned that we'd been scrubbed from the running order altogether, on the basis that we'd only found 1 of the checkpoints. They all figured we'd given up and gone home. We didn't even get any lunch, which was no bad thing, because it seemed to consist of stillborn blackbirds which had been trodden on, then coated with curry powder, bay leaves and ginger. Oh, how we all laughed as the navigators tried to pick bits of beak out of their teeth, and oh, how they all laughed as they reminisced about how hopeless all their drivers were. We must see this sport in Britain. All you round-table Rotarian types, stop pushing beds up the high street, jack in the three-legged pub crawls and give the RNIB a call. And then call me to say where and when. Objectivity is a fine thing unless the only object is being first. No journalist has driven the new MGF yet, but already I know that it throttle steers very neatly, that it grips like a limpet, and that there's a whiff of initial understeer on turn-in. Wow, sounds like quite a car, and there's more. The MGF combines the best handling features of the Mazda MX-5 and the Toyota MR2, gripping well but offering adjustability at the same time. And it rides far better than its two main rivals. I know this because I read it in Autocar magazine, who in turn were enlightened by that most balanced and unbiased of sources, Rover. How do we know all this, they ask in print? Because Rover's engineers told us, and in our experience, engineers never lie. Damn it. All those years I've spent on frozen hillsides trying to work out why the car behaves the way it does have been wasted. Instead of agonising over a verdict, I could have simply telephoned the manufacturer and asked for its impressions. Lada undoubtedly would have told me that the Samara was a modern front-wheel drive equivalent to the Escort, and that it offers unrivalled value for money. Volkswagen would have claimed that their new diesel Golf was fast, and instead of calling the new Scorpio ugly, I'd have said that it was bold and imaginative. The Saab convertible was conceived as such from the very early stages of the model's design and suffers no scuttleshake whatsoever. And the best car in the world is a Ferrari, an Aston Martin, a Mercedes, a Bentley, a BMW, a Lexus, a Cadillac and a Jaguar. Engineers never lie my arse. They're hardly likely to spend the best part of 8 years working on a new car and then present it to the press as a bit of a duffer. When I was at the launch of the Escort a few years ago, I never heard anyone on the podium say that it handles like a dog. Not once did the people at McLaren say the F1 was a bit pricey. And the worrying thing is that Autocar may be onto something here. I mean, every popular newspaper in the world relies on gossip, most of which is untrue. Divorces and affairs can happen entirely in the imagination of the writer, in the same way that handling problems and steering stodginess can happen entirely in the imagination of a car journalist. Look, if you were a gossip writer on The Sun and you saw Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman having a row over lunch in the San Lorenzo, you've got a story, even if they were merely arguing over what colour to paint the West Wing's sitting room. Same goes with cars. You feel a bit of a wobble over a particularly nasty pothole, and as far as you're concerned, the car is crap. I've said it before, car testing is an inexact science, same as writing gossip stories. But then along came Hello, and all of a sudden celebs were queuing up to open their hearts. Here at last was an outlet where they knew they could put their side of the story without fear of contradiction. As a result, Hello gets into everyone's lovely homes while the rest of the paparazzi are camped outside, looking at the action through a Nikon F2. And it's basically the same with cars. Every magazine fights to be first with the road test of a new car, and I shouldn't be at all surprised if Autocar beats everyone to it with a new MGF. The trouble is, how do we know that what they'll write about it isn't total bollocks? We don't. Take Paula Yates. I suspect she's a silly two-timing bird who ditched her husband and children for a fling with a hirsute Australian who looks like he needs a good bath. This is a line most newspapers are free to take, but in Hello we get her side of the story, which isn't quite the same, and nor, frankly, do I find it rings very true. Bob Geldof deserves better. And you, the reader, deserve better than what Autocar has in store. They may get the stories first, but if you want opinions rather than public relations puff, stick with the Beeb. Land of the free, home of the dim. My seat was in its upright position, the table tray was folded away, and all my electronic games were off. But despite this, the stewardess was coming down the aisle like an Exocet missile. "Sir," she smiled, "you're going to need to uncross your legs for takeoff. It's a federal requirement." Now, this was a new one on me, but comparatively speaking, it's a pinprick. Earlier in the day, I heard a security guard in a Las Vegas mall tell a group of weary shoppers to put their shoes back on. Our cameraman had been dumbfounded in an Albuquerque supermarket when, after asking for a pack of Marlboro, he'd been told, "This is a family-orientated store, sir. We're not allowed to sell you cigarettes." Shall I go on? OK, how about this? A sticker affixed to the side of a huge rubbish skip warned passers-by not to clamber on the refuse-collecting device. That was a bit odd, but underneath it said, and I quote, that it is unlawful to tamper with or remove this notice. Now, this means that someone has called a meeting and voted to make it illegal to remove warning notices in the state of Texas. Illegal, you'll note, not inadvisable, bloody legal. But the best I've saved till last. My waitress in Reno said she could not serve me with a second beer until I'd finished the first. Naturally, I asked despairingly why this should be so, and was told simply, "It's a rule." And that's it. No argument, no truck, you can't line your beers up, you can't cross your legs on a plane, you can't tamper with notices, you can't buy cigarettes in supermarkets. And the decent Christian folk of Middle America just seem to accept it. Now, these people may be fat and their hairstyles need to be seen to be believed, but they did invent the space shuttle, so they're not stupid. And yet they're quite happy to put their shoes on when asked to do so by someone in a uniform. Why? When the French government tried to increase tolls on lorry drivers, they blockaded the autoroutes. When the Magon came up with a poll tax, people set fire to Trafalgar Square. When the Italians are asked to pay VAT, they lose all their books, remind the bloke from the tax office that he's family, and pop into town for a coffee. I suspect that inner-city America has become so out of control that the only way you can be marked out as a law-abiding citizen is to obey every rule that comes along, no matter how daft or ill-conceived. And if you want the most ill-conceived law of the lot, you need look no further than the new speed limits. This is not some trifling rule about crossing your legs. This is life and death. An entire generation of Americans has grown up knowing that it's entirely possible to die while driving and coast to a halt before you hit anything. Roads that are wider than they are long were subject to a blanket 55-mile-an-hour speed limit, meaning that you could get in the back for a snooze or perform complex operations on your passengers' adenoids without fear of crashing. Your car could weave from lane to lane, but this was no big deal because the guy behind had all the time in the world to get out his car's manual, see where the cruise control off button was, and take avoiding action. But now, most states post a 75-mile-an-hour speed limit, meaning that it all happens so much faster. The drivers are still allowing their hearts to beat once every 15 minutes or so, but they don't realise they're teetering on the edge of a holocaust. And the cars don't help either. In recent years, American automotive design has leapt to a standard only seen before in Italy. The latest Chrysler lineup is staggeringly good-looking, but dynamically, they're still in the dark ages. On my recent trip, I rented a number of different cars, which ranged from the Fowl to the Buick LeSabre. This compact sedan is 22 feet long and 14 feet wide, and I don't doubt was easily capable of handling 55 miles an hour while returning 4 or even 5 miles to the gallon. But now the Dowager is expected to heave itself along at 75, and it just can't cope. The suspension is way softer than marshmallow, which means there's no jarring, but even the smallest pebble causes the car to rock sickeningly for miles afterwards. Ask it to handle a corner, even a gentle one, on an interstate, and it just won't. I'd have more luck getting my 2-year-old daughter to speak Greek. Turn the wheel and it adopts a crazy angle, but doesn't really change direction. After a mile or so, the tyres start to squeal, but it's still going in a straight line. No kidding. I've driven hovercrafts which respond more quickly to messages from the helm. This is a hateful car. The only time I felt even remotely safe in it was outside Arizona's schools, where lollipop ladies erect temporary width restrictions and impose a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit. As I gratefully slammed on the anchors and wound the car down to this more sedate pace, I even had time to think that here at last was a law that made sense. I also thought that if you're going to America soon, do not allow them to rent you a Buick LeSabre, and that Montana should be avoided at all costs. You see, in Montana, they've done away with the speed limits altogether. Only tyrants build good cars. Last week, Michael Aspel jumped out of a cupboard holding a big red book and announced that I was to be the subject of a This Is Your Life programme. My mind was in a whirl. I have no friends who work in television, so they can't wheel any celebrities in through the sliding doors. I have no war medals. I do nothing for charity. I'm only 36. I haven't done anything yet. I was completely at a loss for words, which, as it turned out, was good practice, because 3 days later, Suzuki delivered one of their new X90s to my house. Ordinarily, the road test starts to form immediately in my mind. With normal cars, I'm starting to think about who might be tempted by such a machine and what sort of things would interest them. Should I major on performance, or style, or economy, or roominess? And that's what bothered me with the Suzuki. Exactly who would be tempted by this weird little car? Me? No. My mother? Absolutely not. The woman in Safeway? Michael Jackson? The Ayatollah? My bank manager? It's taken a couple of days to work out that in fact no one will be tempted by it, for the simple reason that it's the most stupid-looking piece of machinery of all time. It's almost as though the designer dreamed up the front to a point halfway down the roof and then, to save time, did exactly the same with the back. Were it not for the lights, you could drive this car forwards or backwards and no one would be any the wiser. In essence, it's a two-seat, Targa-roofed version of the rather nice Suzuki Vitara. They cost about the same, have the same 1600cc engine, and are aimed, I guess, at the same sort of people. Hairdressers. But no haircuttist I know would dream of buying the X90, and that brings me back full circle. Now, Suzuki is a large and clever organisation, so how on earth did this absurd little car ever slip through the net? Simple. They had a meeting. If I ran a company, meetings would be banned. Meetings are for people who are underemployed. Have a meeting and you'll end up with a child support agency, or a Euro, or Birmingham city centre. I went to a meeting for the first time in years last week and was staggered at how little we achieved in 5 hours. This was entirely my fault, but then there's always someone like me in a meeting, someone who has an opinion on everything and wishes to share it. Trouble is that there's always someone with an equally large mouth who disagrees, and that's it. Everyone else is left to do their fingernails while two people call each other names and consider throwing water at one another. When the bar opened, we called a halt, decided we were doing a good job, and no conclusions were needed. Had we been running Suzuki, the X90 project would have sailed through unscathed. I remember in my early days as a reporter for the Rotherham Advertiser covering the local parish council meetings. One in particular spent 45 minutes wondering whether they should have a glass or a plastic water jug, and ended up deciding to have both. In the early days of motoring, car firms were run by one man with a vision. Colin Chapman founded Lotus so he could make small, light, agile cars. Sir William Lyons knew exactly what a Jaguar should be. Ferdinand Porsche was a proponent of air-cooled engines slung out at the back. Henry Ford wanted to pile 'em high and sell 'em cheap. Now look at Japan. With the exception of Honda, all Oriental car firms were founded by large corporations whose sole aim is to keep the shareholders happy. Hundreds, if not thousands of people are involved in every decision, and the management lives in constant fear for its jobs. Had Suzuki been a dictatorship, the X90 would never have happened. Mr. Big Cheese would have strolled through the designer's office, seen the drawings, and fired everyone responsible. But in a committee culture, it's a case of the emperor's new clothes. No one dare speak out, and the project gains so much momentum it becomes unstoppable. And even if someone like me does stick his hand up, the people responsible will fight back. Result? Deadlock. Europe's car firms are in the same boat today. All the founding figures are dead, and committees have taken over. That's how we got the Scorpio and the Vectra. Since ruling figures are out of the equation, no one is prepared to trust gut feeling and instinct anymore, because in the meeting, the guys from the market research department demonstrated that the Scorpio or the X90 or whatever had clinicked well. Then the designer stands up and explains how the push-me-pull-you look will be in for 98, or that the wide-mouth frog face is a happening thing in 96. Rubbish! The motor show finishes today, and few would disagree that the most exciting car there was TVR's new 7-litre V12 coupe. It looks and goes like it does because TVR is run by one man who dreams things up on the back of a fag packet and sets fire to anyone who thinks he's wrong. Democracy. Pah! Never trust anything invented by the Greeks. The Principality of Lavatories. It seems to me that the closed-circuit cameras which are sprouting out of every town centre vantage point these days are pretty much useless. Everyone I've ever seen on a still from a security camera looks like Cyrano de Bergerac, and he always appears to be standing at the counter in a bank brandishing a banana. This, I'm fairly sure, is not a crime. Either that or the supposed criminal has had the foresight to wear a parka with a hood, so we can only see his preposterous nose and the fruit. I mean, if you were out robbing, you'd be fairly sure that some kind of video recording was being made, so you'd wear a crash helmet or a trilby or anything that would thwart subsequent police inquiries. And if they did come round to your house with some difficult questions, you'd only need say that you were elsewhere at the time, but you had seen Gérard Depardieu in town that afternoon looking a bit shifty. Sure, there are some cameras way up high overlooking the most unlikely spots, but the footage from one of these was played the other day on one of the countless new crime programmes, and the thieves looked like small mice with enormous conchs. It was all very dramatic as they ram-raided their way out of a car park with policemen trying to kick in the windows, but the viewer hadn't a hope of identifying the baddies, and that makes the camera pointless. Now, I'm not one of those weird-beard lefties who think that Sony is a Luciferian code for some kind of Orwellian police state. If you're just walking along, picking your nose a bit and scratching your backside, who cares if it's all caught on beta? The cameras are only there to nail people from the sewers, thieves, murderers and blackguards, but they won't work unless we take a leaf out of Monaco's book. This tiny principality, just 2 miles long by as little as 300 yards wide, is watched over by 160 security cameras, not counting the privately run video monitors in car parks and entrance halls. Coming out of my hotel every morning, there were 2 which could watch me all the way to the door of the car park, and once inside, there were cameras on every floor and in each of the 3 lifts. As A.A. Gill wrote in Tatler last month, you don't need a holiday camera in Monte Carlo, just stop off at the border on your way out and ask for edited highlights of your visit. But onanists beware. If they go to the trouble of fitting cameras in car park lifts, you can be sure your nocturnal habits are being monitored too. Now, there is no crime in Monaco. Half the residents may have made their millions through some sort of rule-bending exercise, but there's no petty theft. One lady regularly walks home from the casino after nightfall wearing jewellery worth $3 million, and she's never been touched. People say that this is because of the cameras, but that's nonsense. And neither is it because there's one policeman for every 40 residents. Sure, with hardly any crime to solve, they've nothing to do all day except enforce a dress code. Try walking through Monaco with the hood on your parka pulled up and see how far you get. I'll give you a tenner for every yard you manage before Clouseau interferes. These guys won't even let you shuffle along head down with your collar turned up. They're like stage managers, making sure you look good for the cameras. And if you refuse to look up, they will escort you politely back to France, where you can convalesce. Every night we watch them salute drivers of Porsches and Ferraris and hassle anyone in a dodgy-looking van. Hitchhiking is banned. If you don't look right, you don't get in. And now we're getting nearer the real reason why there is no crime in Monaco. No riffraff. Before you go and live there, you have to produce a letter from your bank explaining that you have enough money to live on for the rest of your life. And let's face it, people with 20 million in the bank are not big on mugging. Couple that to the police with their anti-shabby laws and the cameras, and then you get a crime-free state. Lovely. And so simple. Except for one small thing. Monaco is a lavatory, and if I could find the chain, I'd pull it. No room for dreamers in the GT40. Back in 1962, Enzo Ferrari was trying to sell his company, and Henry Ford was in the frame to buy it. The talks were going well, and a deal was only days away, when the old man decided that his pride and joy would wither and die under the weight of Ford's global bureaucracy. Mr. Ford was livid, and told his Brylcreem designers to build a car that would make mincemeat out of the Ferraris at Le Mans. He was going to teach that eye-tied Dago a lesson he wouldn't forget. The bunch of fives came in the shape of the GT40, which in various guises won the Le Mans 24 hours 4 times. Now, ever since I was old enough to run round in small circles, clutching at my private parts, I have been a huge fan of Ferrari, and especially the 250 LM. But here was a Ford that was beating it. The GT40 became my favourite car, and I would plead with my dad to buy a Cortina to replace the last one he'd crashed. Ford needed the money, I'd argue, to build more GT40s. I had 3 dinky toy GT40s, and my bedroom wall was plastered with pictures of them. I even sat in one once when I was 8 or so and decided there and then it would be the car I'd have one day. Like the Lamborghini Miura, which was also built to spite Enzo Ferrari, it came from a time when car design was at its peak. Look at a McLaren or a Diablo today and tell me they have the sheer sexiness of a 60s supercar. There have been loads of good-looking cars since, but none has had quite such dramatic lines as the GT40. I'm talking about the racers here, not the elongated and muted Mark III road car. I was at the Goodwood Festival of Speed earlier in the summer, and though there were many stunning cars squealing up that hill, I maintain that the GT40 was best. Yes, indeed, the best-looking car of all time. And fast, too. 0 to 60 took 5.4 seconds, and you could get the needle round to the 170-mile-an-hour quadrant on the M1 should you choose. There were no speed limits then, because homosexuality hadn't been invented. It was also a proper engine. I've always subscribed to the view that there ain't no substitute for cubes, and here was a car with 7,000 of them in a rumbling V8 package. And there it was in the grounds of the Elms Hotel in Aberley, fuelled and ready. The keys were in my hand. The sun was shining. The temptation to run round in circles was large. I was going to realise a 30-year-old dream and actually drive a GT40. And I didn't really care that it was a 300 brake horsepower, 4.7-litre Mustang engine road car with a boot. Ford had only made 7 of the things before the American magazine Road and Track said it was a badly made crock of donkey dung and the plug was pulled. And I, the man who loves the GT40 the most, was going to use it to tear up some tarmac. Actually, I wasn't. For the first time in 10 years of road testing cars, I had to admit, after a desperate struggle, that I'm just too tall. And no, it wasn't a manful whinge about being uncomfortable. I was simply unable to get my knees under the dash, my head under the roof, or my feet anywhere near the pedals. If you'd put a pint in front of John McCarthy when he stepped off that plane from Beirut and then peed in it when he was about to take a swig, he would have been less disappointed. But now, I'm glad. Yes, I'm happy that Ford made the car only suitable for hamsters and other small rodents. I'm happy that my trip to Worcester was a waste of time and that I had to rewrite the item I'd written for the programme. I'm delighted that I shall go to my grave never having driven a GT40, because the dream will never be tarnished with a dose of reality. Vanessa Redgrave was my childhood film star idol, and now I've learned she's the sort of woman who probably doesn't shave her armpits. Then there was the Ferrari Daytona, another car I'd wanted to drive since I was old enough to use crockery, but which actually feels like it should sport a Seddon Atkinson badge. So if you're a child longing for the day when you can get behind the wheel of a McLaren or a Diablo, may I suggest you stand in a bucket of Fison's Make It Grow. Because by the time you're old enough, they will have been made to feel old and awful by the hatchback you use every day. A rolling moss gathers up Clarkson. You can see him coming from a mile away. He's wearing a blazer and cavalry twilled trousers. The tie is undoubtedly regimental, as is the stance. Either that or someone has sewn a broom handle in the back of his Harvey and Hudson shirt. This guy talks pure home counties with a dash of Queen. He doesn't have a plum in his mouth, it's a banana. Now, we're not dealing here with a carball. Carball man has a beard and oily fingernails. Carball man has an MG and drinks beer with twigs in it. Carball man feels a genital stirring whenever you whisper "track rod end" in his ear. Whereas Mr. Blazer and Slacks would not be able to identify a track rod end even if one were to leap out of a hedge and eat his foot. Mr. Blazer and Slacks would have trouble telling the difference between a humber and a humbug. Mr. Blazer and Slacks, however, is even more boring because his specialist subject is motor racing of yesteryear. Ask him who set what lap record for what team in the 1956 Cuban Grand Prix and he'll know. In fact, there's no need to ask because he'll tell you sooner or later anyway. As far as Mr. Blazer and Slacks is concerned, real motor racing stopped when tobacco sponsorship and seatbelts moved in. Today he maintains F1 is just a business where people with regional accents are paid huge sums of money to do something that's no more spectacular than ironing. Real motor racers were gentlemen who used their family's money in the pursuit of the ultimate lap. Real motor racers did the decent thing and died when they crashed, which was every weekend. Unfortunately, I'm a soft touch for these people. They assume that because I know how much an Audi A3 costs, I must be on first-name terms with Archie Scott Brown and Donald Fotherington Sorbet, who, don't you know, set the lap record in the 1936, etc., etc., etc. At this point, I discover horse-like qualities and manage to fall asleep while standing up. There's nothing in the world quite so dull as trips down memory lane, especially when the lane in question is Silverstone. Also, I've always thought. In the last couple of weeks, I've been researching a programme I'm making about Aston Martin, and in among the snot-like offal, I've encountered some 3/4-inch pearls. Then I met Sterling Moss, who in less than 10 minutes managed to convince me that 50s motor racing is more exciting than watching an Apache helicopter gunship trying to get a Hellfire missile up the exhaust of a well-driven Dodge Viper. This is because you never knew what would happen next. There was a driver in the 30s who, as night fell, pulled into the pits while racing in the 24-hour race at Le Mans. He changed out of his sports jacket and suede shoes into a dark suit and formal black lace-ups so that he should be properly dressed. And the following morning he changed back again. His team, it seems, didn't mind one bit. Indeed, on the very last lap of the race, they hauled him into the pits again, saying they were nearly out of champagne and did he want the last glass. And then there's the sportsmanship. Sterling once travelled all the way to Indonesia so that he could engage some long-forgotten adversary in mortal combat on the track. When Sterling's axle broke halfway through the event, things looked bleak, but the other chap lent him one, a kindly gesture which Sterling repaid by beating him. This was the old way. In the final round of the 1959 World Sports Car Championship, Aston Martin set fire to their pit garage, which would have been curtains. However, the team next door pulled its car out of the race so the hot favourites could carry on. At around the same time, a driver called Peter Jopp, you simply must know him, suffered a mechanical failure and sought assistance from a fellow competitor who was lounging around on the grass. "Only too delighted," said the other chap, summoning his parents' butler. "Courtney," he barked at the old retainer, "after you've poured Mr. Jopp a Pimm's, perhaps you'd be good enough to mend his clutch." The spirit was matched only by the amateur nature of technological developments. When Ferrari developed a flip-up rear spoiler on the back of their racer, they told the other teams it was a device to prevent fuel spilling on the hot exhausts, and everyone believed them. Cooper found one of its racers wouldn't fit onto the trailer, so they sawed the rear end off, only to find that it went faster as a result. Now, when you've been brought up on a diet of Schumacher and launch control devices, this is just delightful. Drivers racing for no money, team bosses helping one another, pulling into the pits for a glass of fizz. It's all too agreeable. But what was the motivation? Sterling Moss doesn't even hesitate. I did it because I loved driving a good car quickly. It's funny, he was standing there in a blazer and slacks. He had a clipped accent and a smart tie. I felt my eyelids getting heavy, but the man takes the era and brings it alive. Some say he's the greatest driver that ever lived. Well, I don't know about that, but I do know this. When he starts to reminisce, I start to feel like I've got a wet fish down the front of my trousers. Concept or reality? I'm thinking of having Rover's board over for dinner, and when they're all seated I shall produce braised pork with apples and cider. I shall regale them with tales of exactly how this mouth-watering concoction had been made, which tiny little specialist shops in Soho had provided the juniper berries, and how I'd marinated the meat for a week. I'll even give them the actual name of the pig that had found the truffles. But then, just as they pick up their eating irons, I'll whisk their plates away and produce instead a baked potato that hasn't been in the microwave quite long enough. Perhaps then they will understand the folly of producing concept cars that they have no intention of making. Everyone knows that a new Mini is on the drawing board, and we're sure that it will be bigger and more expensive than the current incarnation. But we have no idea what it will look like, what sort of engine it will have, or even where that engine will be. Somewhere in the car is the only guess it's safe to take. So, Rover is teasing us. A few months ago they wheeled out a sporty-looking little thing in Monte Carlo rallying colours, and people in the specialist motoring press had to spend the entire day in the lavatory, whimpering gently. When these guys came out, some were blind, but Rover admitted the concept was just that. It'll never be made. They were just fooling around. And now they've done it again. At the Geneva Motor Show, they whipped the covers off another new Mini, which they explained was a mid-engined rear-wheel drive sportster that, in 5-door form, had more space in the inside than an S-Class Mercedes-Benz. And, they added, it could be a production reality tomorrow. Everyone was impressed right up to the point when they announced that it won't ever happen. So what's going on here? It seems that Rover's new masters at BMW were worried that the intriguing Mercedes A-Class would steal all the headlines at Geneva. Here was Merck's first ever front-wheel drive machine, which is even smaller than a Ford Ka. It would be a big story. So BMW decided to relieve themselves all over Merck's bonfire by instructing the bright young designers at Rover to come up with something even cleverer. And it worked. Merck's A-Class, which is going on sale in the next few weeks, was eclipsed by a car that's nothing more than a hallucinogenic vision. However, I suspect Mercedes will enjoy the last laugh, because in 3 years' time, Rover will have to stop giving us concept cars and unveil the real thing. They've been showing us they can make the most amazing hollandaise sauce, but in reality, they're going to have to serve up a slightly underdone potato. Marvellous. Now this is bad, but it's worse when a manufacturer shows us a concept car that can't be made. My favourite was a Peugeot that did the rounds 10 years ago. It was startling. Small boys were captivated by its swooping lines, but the reason they were so swoopy is because there was no room within the framework of the car for an engine. Now, I'm sorry, but if I were running a car firm and someone brought me a design which precluded the fitment of a motor, I would sack him immediately. I would not instruct him to go away with several 100,000 of my shareholders' pounds, demanding that he builds a mock-up of the damn thing. And even if I did, I certainly wouldn't let the public see it, because then the shareholders would sack me. A car with no engine, Jezza? Great work, idiot. Now get out. Then there's the fascination with the rear-view mirror, a device that I think works rather well. But no. It's almost always ditched on a concept car and replaced with an expensive television camera that feeds its signal to a screen mounted on the dash. I see, but what happens when the lens gets dirty? People who keep plugging away at this ludicrous idea are obviously mad and should be quietly murdered. So what about doors? The hinge is a good idea. It was invented several years ago and works in all sorts of different applications. Your fridge, your rabbit hutch, and even your canal. But car designers are obsessed with alternatives. There was a Cadillac I saw at the Detroit Motor Show in 1989 where the door popped away from the body electrically and then slid forwards to let you in. It worked, but only in the same way that you can use a urinal while doing a handstand. There was a car at this year's Geneva show whose name has gone from my mind. It had chunky four-wheel drive wheels and I suspect the running gear from a Mercedes G-Wagon. But instead of a boxy, practical body, it had a sleek two-seat layout, sort of Robbie Coltrane in lace panties. I know it's vital that car designers keep an eye on the furthest horizon and that it's a good idea to constantly challenge accepted wisdom. But can't this be done quietly, behind the scenes? And that way, when something turns out to be impossible, they can forget it. And when something like the latest Mini concept turns out to be a goer, they just go right ahead. I mean, the old Mini has now been around for very nearly 40 years. So I don't think anyone would ever accuse the Rover people of rushing into things. Cuddle the cat and battle the Bosch. Sometime between the 7th and 8th grapper, Tiff climbed back into his chair and announced that he wanted to buy a BMW M5. At first we thought he was a little more tired and emotional than usual, but his arguments seemed rational. Its engine is so good and I love its looks and it feels so right and you can pick one up for 15,000 or so, he said, before falling off his chair again. Mr. Editor Blick and I didn't notice, though, because we were deep in conspiratorial mutterings. We've got to stop him. We've got to demonstrate that the supercharged Jag is better. The next day, Count Quenchula was out parking cars for his village fete when I called with the news. "Tiff wants a BM," I said. "Oh, Christ," said Quentin. "The poor, deluded fool. I'd better let him have a go in my S-Class." And therein lies the problem. At this level in the market, people have nailed their colours to the mast and almost nothing will shake them loose. Tiff likes BMWs, Quentin likes Mercs, and I like Jags. When I start banging on about my XJR, Tiff will look up from his 24th grapper and ask if I'd like another gin and tonic. And how are the Masons these days? When Tiff is in mid-soliloquy about the smoothness of a BMW 6, Quentin will interrupt to ask if he's run over any old ladies yet. And when the Count tells us about the unburstability of a 500, Tiff and I wonder how we managed to miss his 50th birthday. With cars like this, it doesn't matter what they look like or how fast they go or whether they do 12 or 200 miles to the gallon. It's an image thing, pure and simple. The data is confused, but some figures suggest that up to 90% of Britain's executives never change marques. If they start out in business with a C-Class, they're in Merck's web and there is no escape. During the late 70s and early 80s, a great many bosses did the unthinkable and deserted Jaguar's leaking ship. But the big cat was in their soul, and now the cars are made properly again, many are coming back to the fold. This, of course, means that if BMW wants to maintain its healthy market share, the new 5 Series only needs to be as good as the old one. Tiff will want one no matter what. Thus, as one magazine has already called the new boy close to perfect, you could accuse the Hun of overkill. Certainly, I can't remember driving any other car which does quite so many things quite so well. The £30,000 528 I tested was truly fast and yet eerily efficient. It has room in the back for a small tennis tournament, and yet it handles with an aplomb that leaves you breathless. Then there are the details, the best of which is the interior lighting. You get the usual red instrument, which BMW says provides a restful, get-you-home environment, and I'd have to agree. But in the new 5 Series they've gone further, because next to the mirror are 2 tiny little red spotlights providing a stylish red glow around the centre console. It gives the whole dash an exquisite 3D effect, and in addition you can find your phone and fags. For the Tiffs of this world, for all BMW drivers, this car is better than close to perfect. It's a solid 10. If it had been crap, you'd have loved it, but it's brilliant, so I dare say you'll want to spend your evenings in the garage with it and a bucket of KY jelly. Me, I couldn't wait to see the back of it. And Quentin is hardly jumping up and down either, clutching his privates as he waits for a go. Dynamically, it's superior to anything for the same sort of money made by Jaguar or Mercedes, but we don't care. When I overtake someone in a Jag, you can feel the warmth of approval. People point and coo. They're talking about how good it looks and how the quality is better these days. Middle England wants a Jag. Now try the same overtaking manoeuvre in a 528 and feel the hate. There goes another pushy yuppie, hoping to hit a tree before his ticker gives out. Gaps that open for Jagman are closed when you're in a BMW. People don't like them. I tried this argument on Tiff, but got nowhere. "Look," he said, pouring another grappa, "you can go faster in a BMW than you can in a Jag or a Merc," and then he fell off his chair again. Secret crash testing revealed. When you read a road test report in any newspaper or magazine, you will learn how a car handles at its very limits of adhesion. The reporter will tell you that on a twisting mountain road in the south of France, he hurled the new model into a series of fast, sweeping bends and felt the front tyres fighting for grip under acceleration and the back swaying this way and that under braking. Amazing. The guy has flown out there, climbed into a car he's never even seen before, and within hours on a road he's never used before, he's taking it right to the outer reaches of its performance envelope, without crashing. Formula One drivers test their cars week in and week out. They're on first-name terms with every nut and bolt. They could drive each corner blindfolded, and yet even the great Michael Schumacher is capable of flying off the track backwards from time to time. So what's going on here? Well, a motoring journalist must try to convince his readers that he is in fact a great deal more talented than Michael Schumacher, and that the only reason he isn't out there in a Formula One Ferrari is that he's too fat, or in my case, too tall and fat. So if we crash, and we do, a lot, then it's important to keep the fact hidden from our readers. Did you, for instance, ever hear about the chap who missed a signpost while driving a £30,000 Mercedes G-Wagon down a river in Scotland? I was following him at the time and remember well the moment when it stopped bouncing along the bottom and began to move in a serene and graceful way, like it was floating, which it was. It bobbed along for some time while the PR man hopped about on the bank wondering what on earth to do. Either he could get the ghillie to pull it out with his Land Rover, in which case the pictures would appear in every newspaper the next day, or he could let it sink so no one would have anything to point their cameras at. He let it sink. Then there was the guy who stuffed a Ford RS200 into one of Scotland's more pointy parts. He claims he went off the road in this £50,000 mid-engine supercar to spare the life of a £40 sheep which had wandered into his path. So what about Quentin Wilson, my colleague on Top Gear, who, while going the wrong way round the first corner at Silverstone in a £60,000 Di Tommaso Pantera, got two wheels on the grass? He hit the barrier, bounced into the pit wall and would have hit the barrier again, but there was nothing left by then. And surely no one can have forgotten about the Guardian's man who changed into first while doing 90 or so in the then-new Jaguar XJ220. They had to take the engine back to Coventry in a Hoover bag. But the only reason we heard about this is because it was reported by the man from the Mail who just 2 weeks later quietly crashed a £200,000 Bentley Azure. I'm in the Hall of Shame too. A few years ago I rammed a Porsche 928 under an Armco barrier just outside Cwmbran, and then peeled the bonnet off like it was the lid of a sardine tin while reversing it out again. Now, I'm a man who at school could worm my way out of all kinds of trouble by coming up with preposterous excuses, usually involving tigers. But after crashing the Porsche, I had to stand up like a man and admit to its owners that I'd been a fool. Not in print, though, and definitely not on TV. Only this week I had a minor off in a new type of ultra-racy Vauxhall Vectra. I think I may have bent a steering arm so that now it drives like a crab, but will you see how I did it on Top Gear this Thursday? Not a chance. Now here's my point. Why don't we report these accidents? They're big news. I mean, if you have a prang, your car is off the road for weeks while the insurance company squirms and wriggles. The subsequent repairs will send your premiums into the stratosphere and badly affect the second-hand value of your vehicle. And then there's motor racing. You don't give a stuff about the deft overtaking manoeuvres or the whiz-bang pit stops. No, you like the crashes and the fireballs. That's why you all slow down to gawp at mangled metal on the motorway. So perhaps then it's time for us motoring journalists to swallow our pride and understand that the size of a car's ashtray is maybe not that important. People are more interested to know how we managed to leave the road at 100 miles an hour going backwards. The trouble is that when we crash, it's like Barry Norman spilling his popcorn or A.A. Gill dropping some butter on the carpet. We just ring the manufacturer and a tow truck comes. We fill in an accident report form and nothing more is said. We don't think of it as a big deal. I once tore the front end from a Daihatsu Charade GT40 after plonking it in a ditch at 80 miles an hour, and the press officer merely shrugged it off, saying, "Don't worry, we make one every 23 seconds. Well, good for you, matey, but when I'm sitting here struggling to think of anything to say about the latest dull car that's parked outside, I've just realised that a good crash can fill several column inches. Which is why I'm going out right now to ram a Toyota Corolla into a tree.